Check, check. All right, I'm going to do a quick little bit that I just talked about with my parents and explain a few things in a way that we can mutually uh, draw our own conclusions and progress our research from. And really, I think this is kind of ancient stuff that we should just rediscover because people have gatekept and made us lose all this information. There's a small potential that somehow we didn't already know this information, but I think it's ancient and people are just being assholes. Or somehow we forgot or whatever. Um, So, as you know, I've been doing these like home brews with I don't use the yeast. Um, I use like Pilsner and rye and, just all the same type of, I'll even use oats, like, but just grains. In general, I take a whole grain, and then I put it in water, and then I also tend to use hops, and sometimes I use rice hulls. But the main point I want to point out here is the grains. Let's just focus on the grains, okay? So, um, let's talk about like the industry, as it were. We all know the industry is corrupt, okay? So we look at major brewing companies, which may not have started out so bad, but over time, people just decided they want to milk money from people and trap them in an addictive cycle and toxify them and lie to them, honestly. But the core of this, let's go back to the origin of it, which is raw food products such as grains, which have not been overly processed so that they have their actual nutritional content. And um, I'm going to point out that while there are other complex chemicals involved in the process, that it's really important to point out that dimethyltryptamine is one of the most important latent chemicals in raw foods, and that also there are a lot of and once again I'm saying all this in a way that we can all examine together and grow from. But then let's talk about there's carbohydrates in the grains, carbohydrates and sugars basically, and I also add sugar to my product as well. But like I said, I don't use the yeast. Now, what is yeast? I just looked it up, and it's a eukaryotic fungus. Okay. Then what it does apparently is it takes these carbohydrates and these sugars and it refines them into an ethanol or something. That's what we call the alcohol that people want to drink. Now, that's not the only thing that can be produced by this sort of process. It can also produce toxins. Now, my understanding is that if your food product is pure and that your yeast is pure, and purity is a matter of, another discussion. But essentially what it comes down to is not produced by toxic means and also taken care of correctly. Like the process is monitored correctly. Um, and then the yeast can turn that stuff into ethanol, which is just it's a fuel source. And the problem comes from, you know, improper handling or just like toxins generated by an impure process. And it's even possible, once again, we're going through this together, that the yeast creates the ethanol, and we already know it makes carbon dioxide, right? Because it bubbles or whatever. And then, but is it possible that it can also create like that, like also a toxin? And then is it possible that the clarifier, like the Whirly Flock, which is a like a it's a tablet that can be used to precipitate um what do they call it? Let me go get the thing. Hold on. They say on the package it says on the package it says encourages the precipitation of haze causing materials such as proteins and beta glucans. Okay, so you can do your own research. I'm just trying to get to the point here, which is that interestingly enough, the chemical structure of the carrageenan that they are including in this is very similar to the structure of the ergot mold, which is reported to be able to turn rye into LSD. Just saying. I'm just saying it's very similar. My guess is that it is a very similar process to the yeast, and that all it does is refine the nutrient, and that there's much less toxic property to it if it is harvested from a non-toxic environment and applied in a non-toxic way. Meaning, once again, just like proper like environmental uh conditions. Yep. And also I'm thinking that if there is a difference, even the yeast, which there's got to be, right? The um yeast the yeast probably, if it creates a toxin, my guess is that this, you know, carrageenan type or ergot type, additive clarifier, if that's what the ergot could be classified as well. My guess is that it takes those toxins and it detoxifies them and instead turns them into an anti-addictive chemical known as lysergamide. That's my guess, is that the ethanol is just supposed to be a very effective fuel source, like a sugar. Um, and then the lysergamide is just supposed to potentiate. It's probably like a mono, monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It's probably the same concept as ayahuasca. It's probably like, or rather, it has maybe it's one step past ayahuasca in a sense, where it's the lysergamide that's a result of the ergot mold, or in this case, potentially the whirly flock. Once again, bear with me. Examine all the possibilities here. Find the similarities. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly that for me to have a good point and for you to learn something. But, like psychedelics have proven to be very effective anti-addictive chemicals, meaning that they help you recover from like overuse, I guess, or like exhaustion. They can do this. You understand it. When used correctly, they can be a very effective medicine. In fact, ergotamine was prescribed in America at some point. And now ketamine, which you could technically, if you could classify dimethyltryptamine bonded to a salt compound or even a sugar compound, depending on the way it's put together. That could be considered ketamine. You could also consider crack cocaine a ketamine, couldn't you? Cocaine extracted with a base, and it gets attached into the soda, the salt, the baking salt or whatever. I don't want to go into all that right now. That's not really my um, area of expertise. And if you yell at me, yes, it is, and then say get on with it. I mean, what you want to talk about the MHRB? And was that just ancient ass cocaine? Dimethyltryptamine is just the most fucking. Anyway, moving on. Let's move on. We can come back to all that. Let's talk about cocaine another time, because that is not, while it might be in the scope totally, what I want to focus on is the brewing process from these grains and stuff. Okay? We can talk about all that later. I would like to talk about that later. So, but my point is that grains, even hops aside, because I just want to comment. We can talk about that also. Maybe that's the MAOI. I don't know. The point is breaking it down to the grains and the carbohydrates and stuff being refined by a yeast, potentially creating a side product which can then be taken from with a clarifier and turned into an amide potentially. We'll just put it that way. I mean, what does the word lysergic mean anyway? You know? Lysergy, that sounds like it might be a good thing. I don't know. But my thought process here is that the beer making process actually first of all, doesn't need to include the ethanol process of intentionally adding yeast, especially because there's often yeast present in ambient environments anyway. But if you wanted to, you could add the yeast, and as long as everything's done well, that it should just result in a very pure ethanol, which is a fuel source. And then also, in addition, that these mold or kelp-like products, the eukaryotic fungus aside, what if they're very similar, by the way? And that you can also do this process with that mold or fungus. Once again, a pure version would probably be best, and that it could potentially create a psychedelic compound which assists in the recovery, prevents the hangover process, assists in the recovery from the ethanol use and any potential toxins, as well as potentiating the brew so that you don't need to drink as much to feel satisfied, which is not only good uh, because you're getting a more refined nutrient, which your brain and body can use to function, and not having to process as much material means less waste products. And then in addition, because you can just drink water too. You see what I'm saying? Drink water, eat food. You save resources by not drinking so much at once so that you don't run out. And that's how people create like store caches of like I have this brew from 15 years ago because I was very effective at making this and I didn't overproduce, I saved up because I didn't overconsume. That sort of stuff. Sounds legit to me. It sounds like a good idea, and I think if you're thinking about interfering with all of that because you want to gatekeep and oh, this and that is not illegal or not illegal, I recommend that you take a step back and look at your actions and decide what kind of fucking life you want to live and what kind of world you want to live in. And I suggest you seriously consider your place in this world. Because if you're just interfering with people who are trying to make a legitimate product and serve themselves as is their right as a human being, and they also maybe one day want to share it with people if they get their process dialed in and make other people happy and healthy and well, and you want to stop that, well then maybe you should stop yourself. Okay? That's my thought on this. I'm tired of all this information being obscured arbitrarily and not explained succinctly to people, because I think all that does is hurt people, and I don't think that's beneficial. I think that there's many other ways to deal with that side of existence, and I think that if you feel the need to resort to violence over that, I think you have some other issues you need to examine. Anyway, I don't think people should be gatekeeping foodstuffs and nutrients because we could all be working together a lot harder and more efficiently to assist each other and then actually create lives worth living. And then we could have time to do things that are actually important to us instead of just slaving away for people who are unhappy being our masters. That's just bullshit. That's the bullshit. They're not even getting anything out of it. They're just keeping up a facade because they think it's their only option. Come down from that high horse and let's have a chat, okay? You too can be happy and or dead if you don't want to be happy. Anyway, I encourage you to try this out. I currently order from Delta Brewing. Um, I'm not trying to encourage you to drink alcoholically, and you don't even need to use the clarifier, the Whirly Flock or whatever. And I'd be careful with experimenting, to be honest with you. I would just stick to ordering some grain, and if you can tolerate it, some hops and a little bit of sugar, and then just get one of those bags where you can put it all in like a cloth bag, and then just put some grain and some hops and some sugar in a bag, and then in the cloth bag, and then put it in a big pot of water, and then just put it on low heat for a day. And then you can experiment with the timing and the heat usage and everything, because you could pasteurize it too. You could pasteurize it by turning up high heat. And then, if you enjoy that process, because, if you like fiend for beer and stuff like that, but you don't actually like drinking the beer that's available to you because it makes you sick, try try just doing what I just suggested, because I think you actually just want the nutrients. And if you want to get fucked up, go get fucked up. But like, separate that desire that you have for this beer with like wanting to get fucked up. Because I think if you actually enjoy beer, you probably don't like actually getting sick. My guess. And that if you just want to get fucked up, you can find ways to do that. I don't like getting fucked up. I do like enhancing my experience and all that. That's cool. Like people call like people call like getting high, right? Okay. Well, who's the most high? God's the most high. That's a good thing. Getting high is a good thing. Becoming incoherent and all this other stuff, while it might be part of your enlightenment process, I don't think becoming incapacitated really should be part of your process of getting high. I don't personally think that that's helpful. That's my opinion. I don't think getting sick is particularly helpful. I think there can be something said about purging on occasion if you really need to reset your system, but I think by and large, if you should be working to enhance your experience by being a productive person and by treating people well and elevating your experience as you go along by compounding your health in various ways. Because you can get high off exercise, and if you're not unnecessarily hurting people, and if you're actually doing something that might help you like complete tasks, something meaningful, or at least something fun and entertaining, then you've essentially just done yourself a service and only increased your value. And people who are hating for that are just haters. And if you actually are doing something wrong, you should accept some criticism. So this is my thoughts on all these things. And I think we should strive. I think we should strive to set higher standards for ourselves without holding ourselves responsible for other people's mistakes and giving ourselves a margin of error to learn something and grow. And this process I just described is really important. Think about all the other things in life, like cooking, for example. Like just cooking food in general. It's a very similar thing of taking ingredients and like potentiating them into something that is desirable. And I think we all like foods that have nutrients in them that are nutrient rich and that taste good. And I think that's really as simple as it gets. I don't think I'm going to need to explain to you the process of why food tastes good or why it's important to get proper nutrients in our system. I think if someone's telling you otherwise, I think you should be very skeptical of them. I think you should be very skeptical of people who say that you shouldn't enjoy your foodstuffs and people who say that nutrients are bad, because I think that they're just trying to keep the good shit for themselves. And once again, that goes for drugs and stuff too. Drugs are all just, think about it, like smoking weed. That's a plant. It grows out of the ground and collects nutrients. Tetrahydroxycannabidiol, or even just cannabidiol, or any of the other cannabinoids, a lot of them could just be considered nutrients. Think about that. You know how sometimes if you ingest something that quote unquote gets you high and then over time it stops quote unquote getting you high? Well, maybe your body's just saturated with that nutrient and it's time to start figuring keep a balanced system. Figure out what your body actually needs. You don't need to overindulge. You need to diversify. Cocaine. Let's talk about cocaine briefly. It's a plant that you can extract or reduce a particular chemical from it, which often represents itself as a powder, and people use as like basically as a supplement. It's basically just a supplement, And I'm pretty sure something similar happens where you reach a certain level. Think of it like, what if it's actually a pure extraction and it's just like a medication, and you take it every day or whenever you need it, and it's normal, and it's like that's your culture. Okay, think about that. A lot of real medicines are made from plants. It's just plants that grow that could be food, but they could also be extracted into specific nutrients. And oftentimes, the reason that our body reacts so drastically to these things is because we're deficient. And when we're deficient of these nutrients and we finally get, especially a highly concentrated version of it in our bodies, it causes us to feel very differently. And the important thing is to make sure that we diversify what kind of nutrients we're getting in our body, and so that we're covering all our needs, and then use that to focus on what we're doing, because really our reason for living should be, actually engaging in tasks, I believe. And of course, it's good to have meditation along with just, being productive and doing things that are worth doing, especially if it benefits others around you as well, you know, stuff that you can include people in. But it's still very important to have your own personal endeavors as well. I think it's important to connect with your higher power that way. So, yeah, you know, ancient Chinese medicine, a lot of it seems to be just plants that they grow and then they extract the nutrients. Like ginseng extract is a really good example, you know? So, I encourage you to examine all of these thoughts and processes. Genuinely, I really do think you should think about it. And I think you should think twice before trying to gatekeep this stuff for someone else and trying to take stuff from someone else that doesn't belong to you. Because I think it's really important to realize that um, 9 times out of 10 in a healthy society, if you just ask for help getting your shit together, you'll find a way. You'll find someone out there who's willing to help you get your shit together. And as long as you don't abuse that, you'll be successful. Either that or you're not meant for this world. It's one or the other. So with that in mind, I'm going to end this video and I'm going to probably start another one and start playing a game.